Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Anna Brutlag, the Associate Director here at Pet Poison Helpline, and thank you so much for attending our co-sponsored webinar with AVMA Life today. If you are curious about organizational design for the 21st century, you're in the right spot. We are very honored to have Dr. Robert Trimble presenting today. So allow me to get things started. I'm hosting this webinar, and then I'm going to turn everything over to Dr. Trimble. So real quick, first of all, I want to give a lot of thanks to AVMA Life for sponsoring this webinar. We so appreciate it. We have, as some of you may know, we've had a partnership now with AVMA Life starting, several months ago, in which we've been putting together a series of webinars mainly focused around non-toxicology topics, but things more akin to wellness, but things that we know impact all of us as veterinary professionals. So be that a veterinarian, a CVT, or you're part of the veterinary support staff, these types of topics are going to impact you. And so what we are looking to do are bringing forth speakers that really play a role in helping us as professionals understand the role that we live in making our world a better world to work in. So before we get started, let me just remind you guys of a couple of things. If you would like a copy of today's presentation to take notes on, to print it off, you can just download it from the Handouts tab in your dashboard. If for some reason it's not accessible there, go to our website, petpoisonhelpline.com, and you can download it from the tab that says Veterinarians. So as typical, this webinar is being recorded. So if you would like to go back and re-watch this webinar, or if you have colleagues that you think would benefit from watching this webinar, it will be live on the Pet Poison Helpline website within 24 hours. You can review it at that point in time. Now, most importantly, you certainly may be able to get CE credit for watching this. Now, unlike most of our webinars, we do not yet have RACE approval for this. RACE approval is actually pending. So what we will do is, if you've attended our webinars in the past, as is normal, you will receive your CE certificate within 24 hours. And that CE certificate, because again, it's not RACE approved, you'll go ahead, if you want to submit that to your own state board for CE or just hang on to that for your own records, go ahead. If, in fact, this webinar does become RACE approved, we will reissue a CE certificate to all the attendees, and that CE certificate will then very clearly state that this is a RACE approved event. So stay tuned for that. Now, I just wanted to let you know, if you are the one who logged into this webinar, and we have your contact info and we'll send the CE certificate to that email address. If you're watching this in a group, what we need you to do is at the end of the webinar today, send us an email at info@petpoisonhelpline.com, and you'll see that on the last slide here. But send us an email with the names and email addresses of everyone in your group who watched this so we can issue them CE certificates. And you have a 24-hour strict deadline to get us that information. So for today's webinar, we're set up to go for an hour. If we do go a little bit past 1 p.m. and you have to go, not a problem. You'll still get full CE credit for that. And we will actually be answering questions live. We're going to actually have some interactive polling as well. But if you have questions during the webinar, feel free to type them into the question box. Now, I'll be monitoring the questions, and if it's something that a lot of people are having questions about, we'll interrupt Dr. Trimble and talk about it then. Otherwise, I might wait till the end and have him address some questions at the end. So depending on what the question is. But again, don't hesitate to ask if something comes up. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and, let's see. Whoops, hang on, guys. Minor technical difficulty here. All right. I'm going to go ahead introduce Pet Poison Helpline. Many of you are familiar with us, and welcome back. Pet Poison Helpline is a 24/7 animal poison control center. We're based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have vets, lots of vets and lots of techs. We're growing really fast, and that's really exciting. We have obviously vets who are boarded in toxicology, but we're really proud to also have internists and criticalists on staff as well, which really adds to our well-roundedness here at the practice. And we actually operate a human poison control center side by side. So we also have PharmDs and MDs on staff who, as a vet, I actually do consult them fairly frequently. We oftentimes use a team approach, especially for novel toxicants, human drugs, things of that nature. So our consultation fee per case is $59 US. You can call back as many times as you need to, and then we will send a fax or an email of our case report to the treating veterinarian as well. So the other thing that Pet Poison Helpline really prides itself on is we really see ourselves as an educational center. And that's one of the reasons that we've been doing these free CE webinars for over 5 years at this point in time and have a very large database of archived webinars. You can see on the screen some of the free CE tools that we have available. Our iPhone app, actually, there's a charge for that, it's $1.99, but everything else is available at no cost. So if you have questions, you want videos to put on your clinic website, want things to share with social media, small animal toxicology, go to our website, all of that's there, or just send us an email and we'll get you everything you need. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Katrina Geithner from AVMA Life. Katrina.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Brutlag. Hi, I'm Dr. Geithner. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I'm the trust representative for AVMA Life. As you can see, we're celebrating our 60th year of veterinarian-inspired coverage. And this is insurance designed by veterinarians for veterinarians. And during our 60th year, we've launched a new website that's easier to navigate and allows you more options for estimating your coverage and paying bills online. So if you'll be at AVMA Convention in July, stop by our booth and we can take you on a tour of our new website and answer any of your questions. So the next slide, you'll see some of our personal products that we offer for veterinarians. These are some of them, not all of them. We definitely have life insurance and more, including disability. We provide coverage for all stages of life, and I imagine there's all stages listening today. So if you're a recent graduate, with student loans, we offer a supplemental disability should you get sick and can't make your payments. We've also partnered with an online platform, Credible, that can help you consolidate your loans and get a lower interest rate. And then as you move along in your career and you start your family or maybe even buy a clinic, we've also increased our coverage. We've listened to you where we've increased our life insurance coverage to $2 million, and we have a short-term disability policy that includes a maternity benefit. But in addition to our lines of personal insurance at AVMA Life, we have a strong commitment to wellness initiatives. We have partnered with AVMA, with AHA, Zoetis, and other industry leaders to bring tangible solutions to wellness concerns. We're also very proud of our partnership with Pet Poison Helpline and their help in sponsoring these webinars, especially today with Dr. Trimble. We've had a profound response to these webinars. We've had a great number of people sign up, so we know there's a definite need in the veterinary community, and that furthers our commitment to making a difference. So I know we'll get some great takeaways today from Dr. Trimble, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So once again, thanks for joining us. Make sure and stop by and say hi at AVMA Convention. And Dr. Brutlag, we'll go ahead and let you introduce Dr. Trimble.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Geithner. I am looking forward to seeing you at AVMA as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today, Dr. Robert Trimble, who you can already see here. He is a future-focused veterinarian, an entrepreneur with a passion for innovating the intersection of medicine, technology, and organizational design. He graduated in 2013 from the University of Illinois College of Veterinary Medicine and currently works as the head of veterinary services for Fuzzy, a tech startup company based out of San Francisco. His special interests include surfing, telemedicine, and understanding the impact of exponential digital technologies on business, the economy, and society. Dr. Trimble, take it away.
All right, guys, thank you so much for the very warm introduction, and thank you everybody for attending the webinar today. This is definitely one of the bigger audiences that I have spoken to in a completely empty room. So at any rate, thank you so much for showing up to the webinar today. Really looking forward to sharing some of what I've learned with all of you. So a little bit of context here. You heard that I'm working right now at a tech startup in San Francisco. This is by far something that's completely foreign to the rest of my life. except for the last roughly year and a half, this has kind of been what my normal has been. I grew up on a dairy farm actually in rural Illinois where animals were some of my first friends. I went to the University of Illinois College of Veterinary Medicine and graduated there in 2013 with my wife, who's also a veterinarian. And shortly after that time, we moved out to California just to try something different and have a different change of pace. And in a strange course of events, I found myself as the head of veterinary services for a tech startup called Fuzzy. Now, when I was growing up on the dairy, you know, my dad was a dairyman, his dad was a dairyman, and I think his dad before him was also had several animals running around. And so it got to the point where, you know, actually we ended up selling the dairy in roughly my junior high years. But before that time, I was thinking, you know, is this what I'm supposed to do? Am I supposed to come back and follow tradition here? I remember having a conversation with my dad and saying, you know, Dad, when I come back from college, is this what I'm expected to do, you know, to carry on this tradition? And you know what he said? He said, do what makes you happy. Do what makes you happy. So the point is here, very early on, I recognized that I was in a period or in a profession that was undergoing change. It was a part of a profession that was undergoing a rapid amount of change. I believe we're in the same position today with veterinary medicine. Veterinary medicine is in the process of undergoing a period of rapid change. So first off, before we get started, I just wanted to know a little bit more about the audience. So let's do a quick little poll here. Just wanted to know if you're a student, if you're a practicing veterinarian, if you're an industry representative, or if you are practicing something completely different. Can I get some assistance here as the poll launch? Can anybody see this poll?
Absolutely. Let me see if I can help you out.
There we go.
All right. Okay, if people can see that, yeah, go ahead and select one. And we'll leave it open for a little bit here. We can see the results rolling in on our side.
Interesting.
Okay.
Looks like the majority here is going to be practicing veterinarians. Excellent. Excellent. So we have 55% practicing veterinarians, 16% in industry, a 28% of you, about a little over a quarter of you are practicing something completely different, and then 1% of you are actually students today. Excellent. Okay. Cool. So let's see, Katrina, Anna, can they see the, there we go. Okay. So one other quick question here I'd like to ask the audience. For those of you with children, and to this question you can simply answer this in the chat bar on the side. There's a little question bar that you can ask or answer this. So for those of you with children, if you could ensure one thing for the future of your children, what would you wish for them?
Okay, so I'll be monitoring the questions as everyone is sending in questions. I'm just going to start to read some off. Good health, happiness, a more stable world, a healthy environment, happiness, to be happy. I'm seeing a pattern here, that they live a life full of passion, long health, security, true love, world peace, safety, a good future, to be able to support themselves, self-sufficiency, resilience, happiness, no student loans, oh, hear, hear, a world with true equality, a healthy environment, a career that they enjoy, feeling good about themselves, happiness. I want to be happy if my daughter, I will be happy if my daughter chooses to be a vet, but not to face the student loan crisis. Yep, I understand. A successful career, children of their own, do what they love, confidence, true happiness.
Starting to pick up on a trend here, right? I've heard happiness at least half a dozen times here. I don't think I heard anybody once mention that I want my children to be phenomenally wealthy. That will come up later on in this talk for sure. Interesting. Very good. Thank you guys so much for participating in those quick questions. Really appreciate your participation. Let's see if we can dive in a little bit more. So first off, again, setting the context a little bit here. Let's talk about what we know. This is where we've come from. This is what we know. So let's take this back to the Industrial Revolution. This was a period of time from around 1760 to around 1830 AD. We switched, our society started to switch from this very agrarian lifestyle to one that was a little bit more urban. We started moving into cities a little bit more from the farm. We also had production that started to shift from this mostly handmade production to actually using more machines in order to make a lot of the products that we use. It was a time of iron, water, steam, and the rise of mass production. It's been called the most important event in the history of humanity since the domestication of animals and perhaps since the invention of language. The Industrial Revolution marked a major turning point in history, and practically every aspect of life was influenced in some way. And a lot of people think we're undergoing a similar process today. This is what work looked like. This was work of the day. Workers by the hundreds were leaving the farmlands and opting to work in factories instead. The work was rote. It was very mechanistic. It was simple. It involved simple, routine movements without the requirement for complex creative thought. It was predictable too. You knew that the work that you were doing today was pretty much going to be the same work that you'd be doing tomorrow, probably next week, probably next month, and maybe even next year, maybe even 5 years from now. You knew that what you were doing today was pretty much going to be secure, that what you were doing today was going to be what you'd be doing in the future. And really they had to thank this guy for this. The people who were working in this assembly line really had this guy to thank for that type of work. His name's Frederick Winslow Taylor, and he's considered the father of the management theory known as scientific management, whose sole purpose, whose sole reason for existence was to analyze and synthesize workflows in the sole pursuit of scalable efficiency. Scientific management. So we started to look at organizations and the processes that organizations follow like a machine. You could tweak one early function of the production line, resulting in a very predictable outcome that could be replicated over time. And in fact, the World Economic Forum is actually suggesting that we're now entering the fourth industrial revolution. The first one, they say, actually took place back in the late 1700s. Usually it was involving steam, water, mechanical production equipment. A little less than 100 years later, we saw the division of labor. Electricity came online, and then mass production started to be more of an impact on our society. A little less than 100 years later again, we saw the rise of electronics and information technologies. Automated production continued to advance our society. And then today, what we think we're starting to see is the fourth industrial revolution, where we actually see an overlap between the cyber and the physical. A real easy example that first comes to mind here is the game that was this big hit about a year ago, Pokemon Go, right? Where you're walking around with your phone in your physical environment and you have this overlay of something cyber that really complements and augments your reality. So we know that today's world is not the same as it was during the Industrial Revolution. When it comes to the business climate of today, change happens fast. In fact, 89% of the Fortune 500 companies in 1955 were not on this list in 2014. So as startups, armed with better technology, move faster and disruption happens more frequently, the average time that a company on the S&P 500 index continues to decline. And this is a look at that over time. If you were a company on the S&P 500 index back in 1960, you could put your feet up, light up the cigars, because you were going to be around for a while. You can see on the left side of the screen that if you were on the S&P index in the 1960s, you knew that your average lifespan of being one of those premier companies was around 50 to 60 years. Fast forward to today, we have a very, very different story. We see that on average, the average company lifespan of a company on the S&P index is actually between the range of like 15 and 18 years. So in looking forward into the future, our projections kind of show that this is projected to continue to fall. And so what's driving this? What's driving this? This is what I've been studying a lot of over the last probably year and a half, is what's been driving this change. And one of the major drivers, not the only driver, but certainly one of the major drivers, is the influence of these technologies that we're seeing. And when we think about the evolution, when veterinarians in general, when we think about evolution, we tend to think of evolution kind of linearly, right? Where we have two parents that come together, create an offspring that's a little bit better fit for the future environment. But what's interesting is that when you look at the way technology evolves, which they've been studying this now for 2 to 3 decades or so, maybe a little more than that, they actually show that technology doesn't evolve on this linear growth curve. It evolves exponentially. So on one hand, veterinarians, we kind of have an intuitive sense of this, right? Mitosis, right? 1 cell turns into 2 cells, into 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and pretty soon you're off to the races, growing very, very rapidly. And that's precisely how technology grows. And so this graph is from a group called Singularity University out here in Silicon Valley that's been really at the forefront of studying this effect. And this is a graph that looks at the exponential growth of computing power from the 20th century through the 21st century. And it's looking at the number of calculations that we can do per second per $1,000 spent. So if you look in the middle of the graph there, that's 2,000. That's right around when our technology surpasses the power, the computing power that is contained within an insect brain. Okay? Fast forward to today, and you can see that we're getting close to the power of a mouse brain. And it doesn't take very long into the future before now our technology is more powerful than you as an individual. And then by 2040, 2045, our technology has advanced to such a high degree and the rate of change is advancing at such a fast degree that now our technology is projected to surpass the computing power of all human brains put together. Now that's a crazy idea, right? And this idea comes back to the premise of what the major factors that's driving this change, and it really revolves around the principle of what's called Moore's law. Moore's law, and it's based on this principle that the computing power that enables these technologies doubles roughly every 18 months. And so exponential growth, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? One easy example to help put this into context is if you take 30 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 linearly, you have a pretty rough idea of where you're going to be. You'll be roughly 30 yards away. You could probably even see where you're going to be. But if you took 30 steps exponentially, do you know how far you'd be? Can you have a rough idea in your head of how far you'd be if you took 30 exponential steps? It's about 1,000,000 meters away. I'm sorry, a billion meters away, or 26 times around the planet. That is the power of exponential growing technology. And this is the pace at which technology evolves. And so today we now hold the code of life, the very code of life in the palm of our hands. Not only are we now writing lines of computer code, but we're actually starting to tweak and edit the very code of life. And this technology isn't sitting still. It's evolving and improving at that exponentially growing rate. It's growing at an extremely rapid clip. So the interesting thing here is that not only does the power of that technology grow on an exponential growth curve, but the cost of that technology decreases on an exponential growth curve as well. So why this is important is, if you look at the cost of sequencing the human genome over time, if you look back to the year 2000, it was about $300 million to get the real first human genome. And by 2006, it had dropped to 14 million. In just 6 years, it had dropped that much. And by mid-2015, it had dropped to $4,000. By the late 2015, it's just a couple years ago, it was already less than $1,500. And then by next year, it's projected to drop to less than 20. And then by 2022, it's projected to sequence the human genome is projected to cost the same as flushing a toilet. So why is this important, right? So if you were a vet who graduated when I did in 2013, Sequencing the dog's genome for your clients isn't even on your radar. Who would pay that much for such a thing? But when it's as cheap as flushing the toilet, who wouldn't pay for that sort of thing? So the question then becomes, now that you have the genome, what can you do with it? A dog's genome has about 2.8 billion base pairs of DNA. And we hardly have enough time to write medical records at the end of the day, not to mention the amount of time it would take for each of us to filter through the 2.8 billion base pairs and make an educated assessment of what that might mean. And this is precisely where artificial intelligence is poised to disrupt healthcare. And so where does artificial intelligence show up in healthcare? One of the best examples that I can think of is IBM's artificial intelligence unit called Watson. And Watson is actually out there predicting disease now. There's also other companies like Kernel, which may democratize brain boosting. There's the Intuitive Surgical's Da Vinci robotic surgical unit, which has basically reinvented minimally invasive surgery. And this doesn't even touch on the biotechnology revolution that's underway, unlocking our understanding of the human genome and so much more. So IBM Watson, for example, can filter through vast amount of medical data and provide clinicians with evidence-based treatment solutions based on what it reads. And since it doesn't eat, it doesn't sleep, it doesn't take a vacation, there's no slip and fall accidents, there's no interdepartmental rivalries, it can comb through scientific data faster than an entire class of third years at finals time. Now, IBM Watson, they recently launched a special program for oncologists, which is actually able to provide clinicians with evidence-based treatment options. So Watson for Oncology, it can analyze the meaning and context of structured, think the standard SOAP form, as well as unstructured data, think like a CT scan or a line of text within an email from a client. It can provide these clients with evidence-based treatment options based on what it reads. And a really interesting case study of this is actually a woman in Tokyo a few years back who had this type of leukemia that was originally diagnosed by doctors. They started her on a course of chemotherapy, and they noticed that she didn't seem to be improving like they thought she should have been. So in their infinite wisdom, they pitched this case to IBM Watson, who within just about 10 minutes compared the patient's genetic changes with a database of over 20 million cancer research papers, delivering an accurate diagnosis and leading to the proper treatment that had proven elusive. So the point here, again, thinking on an exponential growth curve, don't think linearly, think exponentially here. What happens when your role as a practitioner is taken by an artificially intelligent computer that can diagnose faster and more accurately than you can? How does your role as a healthcare provider change? These are the important implications and the important questions that we need to be asking ourselves as professionals, veterinary healthcare professionals, as we think about what technology is going to be doing in the very, very near future. And it's not just affecting the small animal world either. It's also affecting the large animal world. Memphis Meats is a company whose goal is to produce the world's first chicken without the animal. It actually grows beef, pork, and poultry tissue in the lab by feeding animal stem cells a mixture of oxygen, sugar, and minerals, which over several weeks develop into skeletal muscle in a bioreactor. So what they're doing is they're basically developing a way to harvest and produce real meat from real animal cells without the need to feed, breed, or harvest actual animals. So what does this do to the large animal veterinary space? It completely disrupts it, right? So that what they're doing here is they're making a product to try and meet the growing demand for protein across the globe, produced in a more sustainable way. And they claim that the process actually requires up to 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, land, and water than conventionally produced meat. And most importantly, of course, it's delicious. So again, let's step back. This is a lot of information, and it can be a little overwhelming, especially if this is the first time you've heard of this. So let's put this into context here. What does this all mean? The world is moving faster. And more importantly, not just moving faster, but the rate of that change is speeding up. And so if organizations want to keep up, adaptability and responsiveness, those attributes of an organization become far more important than efficiency and predictability. Now remember, for the last century and a half, that's what work's been all about. It's been all about achieving operational efficiency that is scalable. And in the world of the Industrial Revolution, this worked. It worked really well. The world of the Industrial Revolution consisted of highly standardized tasks, highly specialized tasks done the same way everywhere throughout the company, regardless of whether you were in San Francisco, California, or in Raleigh, North Carolina. But the problem with this type of approach to business is that this is the exact type of work that can be most easily done and taken by robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. So this type of work, this rote, mechanistic, codifiable labor, is going the way of automation. Now don't get me wrong here, efficiency and predictability, these are still very important attributes to think about as you're thinking about how to improve your business overall. And ultimately it is about finding that balance between an organization's long-term objective and its short-term goals. But when you're working in a business environment that is vastly different from the one in which Henry Ford's assembly line prospered, the priority placed on these attributes begins to shift. It changes an organization's business practices. For example, how you conduct meetings, what type of meetings you conduct in the first place. This changes your standard operating practices. It changes what metrics you look at to define success. It changes business models. It changes the leadership. That's another really important factor here. It changes the leadership from this very paternalistic, dictatorial style of leadership where I'm kind of like your dad or your boss and I tell you how to do your work, to actually more of a servant-based style of leadership, characterized by the sharing of power, of putting the needs of others first, and of helping people develop and perform at the highest level possible. Now obviously this is a much more challenging type of leadership than the traditional form of saying, hey, just do it, I'm your boss, right? It's traditional command and control there. So leadership actually becomes an even more important skill in this future. And the shifting of these priorities encourage different interpersonal behaviors within the workplace, which are arguably better for personal well-being. Again, considering the needs of the whole team versus thinking solely about oneself, and focusing on, for example, solving a problem or solving an issue at hand rather than trying to focus on place blame. But we have some hurdles. Dr. Elizabeth Strand, in a couple of previous webinars here, has actually been speaking about some of those hurdles that we have to overcome within the profession. She identified several different poor sources of sources of poor wellness in veterinary medicine. I'm not going to dive into all of that. You have access to those webinars. But what I'm trying to focus on here today is not the negative side of things, not taking you from -10 up to 0. We're trying to focus on today is taking you from 0 and moving you up to 10, focusing on the positive side of things here. So what else do we know? Worldwide, let's talk about some engagement data. 23% of employees leave work feeling drained or very drained every single day. 33% of employees can't or don't believe that their company's core values align with their own personal values. We know that 57% of employees wouldn't recommend their organization as a good place to work. 57% of your own employees wouldn't recommend where they work to their friends. They would not want their friends to come and join them. That's pretty sad. 60% of employees also notice that their job is taking a toll on their personal life. Right? We have some major hurdles to overcome here. So if we're already overwhelmed, if we're already depressed and disengaged, then how can we possibly hope to cope with this rate of change? You know, and during my 4th year of veterinary school, this is what I first started to study. I first started studying this problem. I wanted to understand how to create a positive workplace environment because I knew that really for my own sanity, when I graduated, I would either have to find this positive workplace environment or create it on my own. And it's only been within the last year or two that I've actually started to recognize that the solution to the problem on the left the well-being issue, actually mimics fairly closely the solution to solving the problem of how to help an organization deal with the strain of keeping up with exponentially advancing technologies. So I started studying happiness, or positive well-being as it's more accurately called, how to shift from sadness to a state of happiness. I started studying about how to shift the general mood of an organization from one of sadness and despair to one of optimism and well-being. I started studying strategies that one could use to increase the general well-being of the people who are working for you within your organization, starting with the individual. I started looking at the factors that contribute to one's overall general level of well-being or happiness. And I looked at a broad range of perspectives from different disciplines, different philosophies. Now, and at the time, I was being trained as a doctor, right? So I started with what I knew. I started with what the science could show us. And one of the first bodies of research that I came across was actually the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center. Now, most of us think we know what leads to happiness, what happiness is, but do we really understand the actual elements that promote happiness within each of us? And this was the question that Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania started to answer. He wanted to answer this question. So he actually titled his work, he spent several years studying this and titled his work Well-Being Theory, where he concluded that really there are 5 essential elements to well-being falling under the mnemonic of PERMA. We're going to dive into that just a little bit here. And this really helps us understand the elements that lead to a more joyful life. So he concluded that there are 5 elements to well-being, right? PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. And it really breaks it down into these 5 things, where positive emotion is the ability to be kind of optimistic and look on the bright side. It's just generally having a positive outlook. Now, it is important here, I want to take 1 second to distinguish something really important with this first bullet point, in that it's important to distinguish between pleasure and enjoyment in this first element. Because pleasure is connected to satisfying the bodily needs for survival. You know, satisfying needs such as thirst, hunger, sleep, that sort of thing. But where enjoyment comes in is actually from intellectual stimulation and experiencing a deep state of creativity at work or in life. The second bullet point here is engagement. This is the state of being where you're kind of, the technical word here is called flow. It's a state of being in flow, being plugged in, being in the zone, where the challenge at hand perfectly matches or just barely exceeds your ability to deal with that challenge. It pushes you at your limit or maybe just a little bit far, but you're able to accomplish the task. And it's a deep, satisfying, it's a deeply satisfying feeling and emotion that one can experience in that state. The next step here is relationships. This is just simply what it sounds like, right? Being in the presence of friends, family, having intimate social connections. The next bullet point here is meaning. This is defined as kind of belonging to and serving something bigger or larger than oneself. And then last, we have achievement, which is simply the accomplishment that is pursued even when it brings no positive emotion, no meaning, and nothing in the way of positive relationships, simply for the pursuit of achievement. Now, notice here that, kind of getting back to the question that we started with at the start of this webinar, is that money isn't on this list, right? So I want to be careful here, because it's not that money doesn't buy happiness. It certainly can, but only up to a point. It's actually probably more accurate to say that money makes life a little bit less painful. And in fact, this is what they've been starting to see, is that the reported quality of one's emotional daily experience starts to level off at around $75,000 per year of income. Now, this is according to a study done by 2 Princeton University professors, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, where they actually studied and analyzed, it was actually about 450,000 responses to a daily survey of 1,000 randomly selected U.S. residents, and found that while life evaluation, how you evaluate your life, how you see yourself in the greater scheme of things, tends to increase with annual income, the quality of the respondents' everyday experiences did not improve significantly beyond approximately $75,000 a year. Now, this was with
Robert, just a quick question for you, if you don't mind. There's a question
sure.
from the audience. Is the $75,000 a year, is that per person or per household, per family?
I believe this is per individual. I believe this is per individual, correct, yeah. Yeah. So now this is with randomly selected Americans, right? I'm not quite sure how this would compare if you're the type of veterinary graduate graduating today with the debt load that's facing today's new graduates, but that's an entirely different story. The point here is that money matters, it does, but it's not a key driver of positive well-being. Now, a lack of money absolutely contributes to unhappiness, but beyond a certain point, more money has actually been shown to have a decreasing returns on one's overall level of happiness. During the Industrial Revolution, we started to look at organizations like a machine, right? We talked about this earlier. We thought that we could do the same thing with people too. You could tweak an early part of the production line, resulting in a predictable outcome that you could replicate over time. Scalable efficiency, right? Surely the same would be true for people, right? Tweak their behavior by paying them a little bit more, and you get a better output that could be replicated over time. And for a long time, this worked, right? This worked really well. You know, when you're doing the type of work that is rote and mechanistic, factory line work that's characterized by Henry Ford's production line, when the work that you're doing doesn't require a lot of cognitive skill, using extrinsic motivators works really well. Make more widgets, get more money. It works. It's simple, it's direct, and efficient. But when the work requires even the smallest amount of creativity or innovation, where you're trying to solve a problem for which the solution is unknown, extrinsic motivators, these carrots and sticks of the motivational world, these raises, these bonuses, these threats of firing or demotions or pay cuts, they actually cause harm. You actually get less of the behavior you want. So when the behavior or the output that you want from the people within your organization is even the smallest bit creative, intrinsic motivators are far more effective for and overall better for the business. And this is actually what I started studying with, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants here. These two folks here, Susan Fowler and Dan Pink, have actually written a couple of really interesting books that dive into more of the psychology behind these intrinsic motivators. I highly recommend these. You know, they each revolve around very similar ideas, which is why is it important and what drives it. And what they found is the three things that really drive intrinsic motivation. If this is what you want out of the people in your workplace, how do you create an environment in which intrinsic motivation can flourish? And they found that there's three main things you need to focus on. They call them different things. You know, Dan Pink calls them autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Susan Fowler likes to have a little bit more of a broad perspective and focus on autonomy, competence, and relatedness as kind of the three main psychological needs. But they all relate to these three things. Having a sense of autonomy, where you have control over your own life. Having a sense of competence, where you have the ability to see yourself improve at a personally meaningful skill, being deeply engaged in your work, being in a state of flow. And then finally, having a deep sense of relatedness or meaning and purpose to your work and to your life. Being connected to those around you and being a part of a bigger community. So what's interesting about this is that the very things that drive intrinsic motivation are also what are also a part of what Seligman, Dr. Martin Seligman, says are essential features of what leads to positive well-being, right? PERMA. And you can see four of these things directly relate to the things that drive intrinsic motivation. And what's even more interesting I've found is that the very things that contribute to increasing one's positive well-being also appear to be what allows an organization to become more capable of thriving and adapting in a period of rapid change. So the key contributors of increasing positive well-being, let's start with autonomy. We'll do a little bit of a deeper dive here. Autonomy, we know it's a basic psychological need. And this is as deeply American as it gets, right? This is why America's here. We couldn't stand Britain being on the other side of the pond telling us how to live our lives. It's why America's here, and it's also the reason why many entrepreneurs choose to do what they do. It's why they would rather work 80 hours a week for themselves instead of 40 hours a week for somebody else. They love that sense of autonomy. It's a deeply held, deeply human psychological need. In fact, I was in the airport coming home from, I think, seeing my parents back in Illinois over the summertime. And I was waiting at the baggage carousel at SFO airport. And I was standing there waiting, and I remember looking in front of me and seeing a kid no more than 3 years old. He's standing with his dad, and the baggage carousel starts turning around, and the dad tells his son, "Hey, don't put your hands up on that baggage carousel there." And what do you think the very first thing that kid did? He went up and he put his hands right on that baggage carousel. Autonomy, it's something that we are born to, we crave from a very early age. It's a deeply held human psychological need. So that's the well-being side of things. What about as it relates to an adaptive, responsive organizational design? How does that tie in? Well, when the world is advancing at such a rapid clip, if you're the top of the food chain, if you're the guy sitting on top of the hierarchical pyramid, I don't care how smart you are, how intelligent you are, how connected you are, you can't keep up with it. It's not possible. Right? We don't sit around the kitchen table anymore and argue about something, right? We look it up online. We get the answer because we have faith, or we've come to have a sense of trust that the wisdom of the crowd is more intelligent than the intelligence or the wisdom or knowledge of any one individual. And so this ties into your organization, because in that environment, you need the brains of everyone on your team engaged. You need to incorporate a deep sense of autonomy in the workplace, because that's what drives engagement. Next is competence. Seeing yourself improve at a personally meaningful skill, being in flow, being plugged in the zone. This is also a psychological need, and we simply love seeing ourselves improve. We're intrinsically driven to do this sort of thing. And being in flow, it feels good. It's a major contributor to one's individual well-being. On the flip side of things, adaptive, responsive organizational design, you want people to be continuously improving, right? If you're not improving, if you're not looking at the environment and saying, how can I improve myself? How can I improve my business? How can I improve the people in the environment that I'm working in? Then you're getting behind, and you're not able to keep up with the rapid pace of change that the environment in which you're working. Relatedness. This is the last one of the three. It's another psychological need. We are social animals. It feels good to belong to a part of a larger group. On the other side, for adaptive, responsive org design, being a part of a community, it simply makes your business stronger. It makes you more resilient. Makes you less likely to suffer the negative impacts of negative Yelp reviews, right? When you're a part of a community that appreciates the work that you do, you're going to find the employees, or not your employees, your customers who love you as a business are going to reach out on their own behalf to defend you if you have a negative Yelp review or someone bash you on an online forum. They'll reach out on their own behalf, right? Having a deep sense of relatedness, this also talks about trying to accomplish a bigger purpose in life, bigger purpose at work, right? This is something that these adaptive, responsive organizations are trying to incorporate, also as they try to think about attracting the top talent to their organization. Companies like Tesla capture the hearts and minds not by saying that they want to build an electric car. They want to make us free from our reliance on non-renewable resources or for fuel, and to make us a multi-planetary species. I mean, that's a massive transformational purpose, MTP. And that's the type of thing you need to be able to think about and talk about with your team in order to retain and attract some of the best talent to help you advance into the future. Tesla, these companies, they play the long game. They play the long game. And earlier this year, Tesla was pretty rewarded by it. They actually passed GM as America's most valuable car company. So there's a revolution that's happening right now at work. There are some companies that are starting to learn to manage their workplaces differently, to emphasize both positive well-being at work as well as an adaptive, responsive workplace culture. Now, there's a variety of companies, and they come from some of the ones you might expect in Silicon Valley, the tech companies, but there's also some non-tech companies, some fresh startups, as well as some aging enterprises here. And this is just a small sampling of them. One of them is Bootsorg. Bootsorg, it stands for Neighborhood Nurses. It was founded in the Netherlands in 2006 with the goal of keeping patients independent and autonomous. It's comprised of completely autonomous teams, small teams of nurses who work directly with the patients in a community-based network free from management structure. Completely free from management structure. They have no managers telling them how to do their work. They're given complete autonomy. They started with 4 nurses in 2006. By 2014, they had 8,000. It's because people enjoy working there. They're working toward a bigger purpose. They have the highest satisfaction rates in the country, and they have average costs of 40% less than other home care organizations. And they've even earned the Employer of the Year award multiple years in a row. So these companies, they know that this isn't just about the technology. That's the important thing to drive home here, that this isn't just about the technology. I want to make sure, though, that we're not just trying to focus on the advice of some technologies in Silicon Valley here, right? So one of the things I wanted to focus on here was to try and give you a different example of maybe a little bit more of a conservative group who's a big fan of general order and what they had to say. So this is a book called Team of Teams, written by General Stanley McChrystal. And, you know, whenever you look back to when the U.S. Army went into Afghanistan to try to deal with the conflict of al-Qaeda, they recognized that global terrorism had changed a lot in 20 years. And in the first years with the conflict of al-Qaeda, the U.S. military was trying to attack this networked organization. Al-Qaeda was very flexible, very fluid, very adaptable with the same general processes that we had used in the previous 100 years. And it didn't work. It wasn't going well. So al-Qaeda was kicking our butts initially. And so what General Stanley McChrystal found was that to win, they had to change. But what was interesting about this is, surprisingly, it was less about tactics or new technology. It was more about the internal architecture and the culture of their force. In other words, their approach to management. So it's not about having the newest gadgets, the newest technology. It's not about scalable efficiency. It's about being the most adaptable. We used to think of organizations like a machine, complicated systems with expert and rational leaders, top-down planning, smooth implementation of policies, and a clock-like organization that runs super smooth. We used to think about people the same way. However, today, there are some organizations that are starting to approach this differently. They're starting to look at the organization like a living organism. Starting to look at the organization like a living system. We found that these forward-thinking organizations are using business practices that solve 2 very important issues facing veterinary medicine today. That's the issue of well-being and adapting to change. These key contributors to increasing positive well-being in the workplace and responding in a future of rapid change, they appear to be pretty similar. So we're about ready to finish up here. Got a few minutes left. Just going to leave you with a few slides on what to do Monday if you wanted to try to make some changes in your own organization to be more responsive, more adaptive in that future that we know we're going into. If you want to try and increase the level of well-being for the people who work for you as well as for yourself at work, you know, here's a few things that we can think about doing. So I want you to be clear here. This isn't prescriptive, meaning it can't be prescriptive. Every organization is going to follow different business processes based upon its own individual needs and desired outcomes, but it is generally directive, okay? So from a bigger picture, taking it from this predictable environment that we used to be in the Industrial Revolution to this sort of really fuzzy, less predictable world that we think we're going into, there's a few things you can focus on doing. One, it's moving from a hierarchy to a network. The hierarchical pyramid from an organizational design standpoint is dead. This is going the way of the dinosaur. This is going the way of the rote mechanistic work. It's now shifting to a networked structure where the goal is to move from efficiency to adaptiveness and responsiveness. From a sense of controlling the people who work for you to empowering the people who work for you. from using extrinsic rewards to using intrinsic motivation, from controlling all of the information and all the knowledge and all the power in the hands of a few to distributing it to the hands of everyone in your organization, from having a sense of privacy to transparency, from looking at your customers and partners to actually shifting the way you look at those people and looking at them as part of a larger community. So first off, start giving autonomy to your people who work for you. Start giving autonomy. Train your staff to the point where you trust them to do the job. Empower and inspire them, and get out of their way. In order to do this, there's a flip side to autonomy. Everybody loves autonomy because they get to do what they want. There's a flip side to it, and that's accountability. It's accountability. So you have to be able to provide structures and systems that support this autonomy, but that also allow you to maintain a level of accountability within your organization. And two real quick examples of this are a basic conflict resolution process. It sounds simple, and in a lot of ways it is, but it's actually very complicated. None of us were really trained in how to deal with conflict. I wasn't really trained in this in school growing up. We weren't trained in how to communicate best between people in order to resolve conflicts. It's just, you figure you communicate all of your life, why do you need training? This is actually really important in this space, to have these structures and systems that support this autonomy and make sure that accountability is a part of your workplace. Decision-making processes is another. How can your organization make decisions? How can people within your organization make decisions if you're not there? Think about that. If you're not there to be the final say-so on how to make a decision, you need to have a decision-making process. And a lot of these organizations have figured out a really interesting way to do that. Lastly, give your staff a way to improve, next, give your staff a way to improve at a personally meaningful skill. This is back to the idea of competence. For example, is one of your technicians always on Instagram and driving you crazy? Maybe just instead put them in charge of your hospital's Instagram page. They're already passionate about it. Just shape that passion into something productive for your business. And then finally, build a purpose-driven culture. And I think this really starts from the initial point of shifting your mindset. And for Fuzzy, where I work, we're trying to shift this idea of moving from sick care to looking at veterinary health care, by shifting from a really reactive style of medicine to one that is actually preventative, continuous care. This changes the way a business model is structured, right? We use a subscription-based healthcare delivery model. And then finally, you can think about using telehealth options. This is another really hot topic right now in veterinary medicine, to lower the cost of service as well as to improve the client experience. So finally here, if you want to learn more, here's just a sampling of some of the books that have had a big impact in my understanding as it relates to this broader trend and the implications that it has for us as a society, as individuals, as well as our economy. I'll start with Why, Simon Sinek. This is the very first book that I started with, and it was a phenomenal treatise in like how to define why you come to work every day. Reinventing Organizations, this is another recent one that just came out. It's diving into more of the overall treatise on shifting from this command and control style of leadership to this more of a servant leadership based style. Next, Exponential Organizations. This dives into a little bit more of the tech side of things. What are these forward-thinking companies that are using technology, or at least aware of how technology is advancing? How are they preparing themselves to survive in that future? And then a couple other resources there. We've talked about Susan Fowler and Dan Pink earlier about intrinsic motivation and what really motivates us. And then lastly, two other really cool resources that I found. AuthenticHappiness.org. That is through the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center. It has a lot of different surveys. This is actually how they got a lot of the data for their studies. Was these surveys that could be taken by anyone all across the world, and they found that these subjective measurements are actually fairly accurate predictor of one's level of happiness that they feel. And then lastly, one other really cool one here is called TrackYourHappiness.org. This is a sweet little thing that sends you reminders once a day or twice a day. You can set it however you want it, but it will send you these reminders to just check in with you, ask you, how do you feel right now? How do you feel about yourself as it relates to other people you work with? And it's just a really neat way to look back over time and see how your happiness fluctuates based on what you're doing, who you're interacting with, and what activities you carry on in your typical life. So thank you everybody so much for your time today. I really appreciate being able to share what I've learned with you. This has been something that I've been really passionate about for the last, well, since veterinary school. And so being able to share it with all of you today makes me really happy, which again, thank you.
Sorry guys, I didn't realize I had muted myself. So anyways, apologize. So thank you, Dr. Trimble. Appreciate it very much. And I think you've given us some really good things to think about, especially as a profession, as an employee, as an employer. And I appreciate the resource list that you included too, because I think that will give people a chance to do a deeper dive into the topic. So we're going to wrap up at this point. I just wanted to remind everyone we do have additional CE, RACE-approved toxicology-based webinars coming up. We have 3 left in our series for the year. The next one is coming up in June, so don't miss out. Summer toxins, given by one of our criticalists. I know she's a good speaker. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be very interesting. So just as we're closing up here, I wanted to apologize. I just wanted to make sure that everyone had Dr. Katrina Geithner's contact information for AVMA Life. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to her directly. And I think that she brought up some really interesting points that AVMA Life is expanding into and some of her early intro. And I myself, my ears perked up a little bit when I heard about some of the opportunities I think that one can have through AVMA. So check that out if you're interested. And then just to wrap up, here's our last slide. Just wanted to remind everyone, because the question of course might come up, when will I get my CE certificate? So remember, we'll send this to you via email in 24 hours, and we're sending it to the person who's logged in. So if you're the one logged in, you're going to get your CE certificate. If you are not the person who logged in and you're watching this in a group, remember that you need to email us and let us know, again, the names of the people who are watching and send us their email addresses. And there's our info@petpoisonhelpline.com email address. You can shoot it there, and then we will issue CE certificates to everyone who is watching. So again, today's webinar was recorded. You'll be able to watch it within 24 hours. It'll be archived on the Pet Poison Helpline website. And all of our webinars are recorded there, and they're all the remainder of our webinars are all RACE approved, so if you need some extra CE, you are welcome to watch that, or if you just want to learn a little bit more about small animal toxicology, because poison is fascinating. You can get your fill of poisons on our website. So without further ado, I'm going to end this. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Let me just take a quick look at our question board here to see if there's any more questions. Bear with me here. So, Dr. Trimble, there is a question for you just about what is fuzzy and what do you do there? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to, sure. So Fuzzy, we're a subscription-based pet healthcare company here in San Francisco that's completely mobile. We focus on prevention and wellness. For a monthly fee, our members of our subscription get 2 house call visits a year from a veterinarian. They get all of their preventative medications included in that. They get all of their vaccinations included in that. And we also do a heartworm test in the home. So it's really focused on prevention and wellness, more so than trying to cure disease. We're trying to focus on how to improve life in general for our pet parents here in San Francisco. Kind of getting a theme here, right? Not focusing on the negative and what leads to our unhappiness, but focusing more on what drives happiness, right? Kind of the same thing here is what we're trying to do at Fuzzy. And trying to incorporate that into the workplace as well. So.
Excellent, thank you. Really interesting. All right, everyone, we are going to end it at this point in time. Thank you so much for attending. As always, we so appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Bye now. Thanks, everybody.